which we're focusing on regain your connection. And what we basically spoke about last time was regarding the deep disconnection that we hold on a sec. A ver, Max, está mal el sonido, por favor. Hay que fijarse con todo esto. ¿Está sonando? A ver, I'm sorry. Okay, that is, sorry again. We were talking about regaining our connection, and that entailed that we are basically disconnected from our basic nature. We spoke about the necessary connection that we need as, well, living beings, as Bert Hellinger says. We are connected through love, and that's not necessarily romantic love as we see it in Hollywood movies, but basically connection through love is a basic attachment and necessary elements that we need to bring together in order to bring about life or bring about belonging. So we spoke about the brain aspect of our mind, the necessary synaptic processes that our brain, even inside the womb of our mothers, needs in order to transform, needs in order to operate. Having said that, regarding the connection that, or rather the disconnection that we feel, usually, we are, ¿qué necesitas, Max? Bueno, pasa. We basically are, I'm sorry, because we are basically disconnected, as was said, from our nature. We are disconnected from our fellow human beings. We are disconnected from our purpose of life, and we are disconnected also from ourselves. That is usually seen through the levels of anxiety, the levels of violence, the levels of addiction that we usually see in the world. We are said to be hyper-connected, but again, also we are hyper-stimulated and hyper-anxious and increasingly lonely. And that has nothing to do with a conspiracy theory, has actually to do with the system that we are born into. We are usually systemic beings. We are usually beings that we belong to a system. Could be a family system, a financial or a historical system. We actually also are composed of different biological systems, call it digestive, call it immune system, call it vascular system, pulmonary system, cognitive system. And all these components of our body and the components, cultural and energetic components that we are born into, is what we are now experienced as human beings, which we are deeply disconnected to our basic systems. Buddhism often speaks about the Kali Yuga, that means the Dark Ages, a time where we are, let's say, overwhelmed with disturbing emotions, overwhelmed with conflicts with others. Our physical system is overwhelmed with disease. We are constantly um, we are constantly also experiencing conflicts within ourselves, within the family, within our bodies. Great nations are on the verge of destroying one another. And it is called Kali Yuga in the sense that these dark ages where we are supposed to be entail a big disconnection, entail a big and troublesome experience. Having said that, that has nothing to do with just bad luck. We are creating our reality, and at the same time, we are creating others' reality. We are co-constructing. We are cooperating, co related or interrelated to build up our fabric of reality. Now, I'm going to go through briefly of what we spoke about, that any given human being needs a connection, needs a sense of belonging, because he also has to belong to a cultural code, an energetic and even DNA and protein chain structure. However, we increasingly experience this connection. And that has to do with a question of love, as we mentioned. And love has to do with attachment to life, has to do with a sense of becoming, a sense of belonging, because as we again mentioned last time, that which is expressed as dialogic fracture has to do with our being has many voices. Our being has a lot of um, memory structures that even unconsciously, when we are very young, absorbed from our parents, from our surroundings. And as we also spoke about, like um, brain cells, that they don't only exist in the brain, but also in the heart and in the stomach, called, um, as Dan Siegel mentions it, the heart brain and the stomach brain, because of the number of brain and nerve cells that are there. More recently, it is found what is the function of those, and the basic function of all of those is the need of becoming one, of adapting to the surroundings. Basically, it is an unconscious grid that tells us whether the place we are born into is a safe place, whether we should switch into a survival mode or into a dying mode, or basically we will be connected to the normal process of um, being breathed, being fed, reproduce, basically take care of offspring, and then naturally go into the biological process of aging and dying. However, um, while most animals actually have these somehow called sixth sense, that they don't need to know a person in order to distrust someone. Cats and rats and even ants and um, animals in general, they can perceive the morphic fields. Morphic fields is what the biologist Rupert Sheldrake mentions as energy fields, as Buddhists call it mandala, energy structures, that when we engaged into those structures, we feel or we are able to detect if they are safe or aren't safe. Basically, we are disconnected from this animal adaptation, from this ability to be intuitive. And as the psychiatrist, I'm sorry, Gabor Mate says, whenever your parents, when you were young, taught you unconsciously to shut up, or they would beat you into a pulp, or they would scream at you. Basically, you learn that to express your feelings, to express your emotions was a bad thing to do. And in order to be loved, you needn't cry. You didn't have to express your feelings. You didn't have to put a tantrum, because then your daddy or mommy would just basically go berserk, go crazy. Having said that, it is really important to consider how we have learned culturally to withdraw from nature, to withdraw from our feelings, as we probably remember one or two instances in childhood that they told us, if you keep on crying, no one's gonna love you. If you keep on crying, if you keep on putting this tantrum, then you aren't going out on the weekend. Then I am not taking you out for the leisure park or whatever. Um, Thanks a lot. Thank you for your greeting. Um, So we have learned to basically disconnect from our feelings. And as we said, this dialogic fracture that it is bad from our subconscious point of view to express our feelings, and it is more important to belong. But then when we are trying to belong to daddy or to mommy, that they are somehow absent-minded, or with obsessive thinking or drinking or eating or obsessive working, or basically with a relational problem of themselves, we get into that structure, and that is what is going to become our dialogical structure, our voices inside ourselves. And I'm not talking about schizophrenia here, or psychoactive drugs. I'm talking about that, as Buddhism say, what we are is the result of our habits. This in Sanskrit is called vasanas. Those vasanas, those bhakcha, as they are called in Tibetan, they are the habits that remind at each moment of who we are. They remind us that we are violent, that we are depressive, that we are anxious or paranoid people, or that we should be distrustful, we should be paranoid, we should be over jealous, or we should be whatever, addicts, or whichever personality that we hold. And that actually has to do with memory. Memory plays a high role on constantly reminding ourselves of who we are. Just to try to explain what I try to say here, hang on a sec. Here we have a brain. It's not a Art Deco avocado. You know, it's a brain from, you know, like a top view. What we have on top is the prefrontal cortex. What we have here, well, are the lobes, but this is the area where our limbic system is. And our limbic system has to do with memory, has to do with emotions. And usually, when we speak about our habits of who we are, is not what we think we are, is how we feel we are. And that it is stored in our memories. It is stored as it is called in biodecodification or decoding. I'm sorry, biodecoding by those important doctors, Hammer, now Salomon Salam, and others, that they speak of cellular memory, that those trillions of structures called cells, they can actually have a memory, and they function through communication in electromagnetic fields. I'll try to explain myself. Our 50 trillion cells, each of them have 1.4 volts of electricity. And electricity, one of its laws is electromagnetic fields, communication through fields of energy. And whenever there is stress or an attack on the body, or basically emotional stress, is not that the cells need to have a meeting and then have a vote and then take a decision. They function, those separate entities called cells, they actually act simultaneously in order to repair or to react to certain stimuli, or stimuli as is called. And that has to do with the notion that we are a structure created by countless cells, but focused on one specific function. Now, no matter how intelligent we could be in our prefrontal lobe, how, let's say, if we are doctors, if we are great sportsmen with great sports intelligence, or financial intelligence, or political cleverness, sometimes, as it is seen usually, we could be very intelligent in manipulating data, but at the same time, we could be child or an infant as far as emotions go. The question and the reason that I brought this slide was, why would memory play a high role in the buildup of our personality? Why we could be carrying a trauma or pain that we don't even know when that happened, we don't even know what happened, but at the same time we could feel deeply disconnected to ourselves, deeply disconnected to nature. So having said that, coming back to the slide, the previous slide, human beings feel disconnected through emotions. We feel in a way that we do not belong, that we aren't worthy of living, or sometimes we have so much pain, dukkha, as Buddhism calls it, from our system we are born into, that we don't know what to do with this pain. And that's why when you see closely addicts to substances, and that I'm taking Gabor Mate's findings and research of over 20 years, where he says a great segment of addicts take substances in order not to be themselves for a short while. Now, that's really important. Why would someone not like to be himself or herself? Why would someone have pain of being himself. And that's an important reflection on what are we doing with pain as society. And as the psychologist Brené Brown says, we numb pain instead of coping with pain, instead of speaking about pain, instead of um, be courageous to look at our pain and our sense of shame and our sense of not belonging with honesty and authenticity. We basically numb pain. We exteriorize our lacking. We try to pretend to be someone we are not. We hoard knowledge. We accumulate wealth. We try to be perfect with our bodies. We try to be the best profile in IG, in Instagram, or the funniest TikTok video, or the most sought after profile with thousands of followers you don't even know, with thousands of friends. They aren't even your friends. And that exteriorization, that projection of a fake outlook, of a fake profile, of a fake friends, is what basically causes more anxiety within us. Now, Buddhist psychology has an important message or important methods beyond what we could think a religion or a sense of being really spiritual. What Buddhism means, or what Buddhism looks for, as the Dalai Lama says, is to basically be a good human being. But in order to be a good human being, you need to belong to yourself. You need to have a basic connection. As Trungpa Rinpoche used to say, you need to have a basic sense of goodness, a basic sense of dignity. Now, as we said, human beings need to learn those skills. We aren't born like happy. We aren't born like with dignity. We aren't born structured. The loving structures, the belonging structures, the sense of meaning that we get in life, we also have to learn it. We have to get it from somewhere. Now, what happens is that when we don't have a reference, and when pain is bequeathed, when pain is inherited unconsciously by our family system, then is when we don't know where our pain is. Now, let me remind you of, I don't know if you read Eckhart Tolle's book, The Power of Now. And he has a very interesting story that also relates to Buddhist psychology, and I will try to explain it. First of all, he was born and raised in Germany. His father was an extremely violent man. He was a heavy drinker, and he used to be violent. He used to beat his mother, and he used to also beat and scream at the children. When he was really young, all he wished for, Eckhart Tolle, the author, all he wished for was his dad to die. He hated him. As he grew up, Eckhart Tolle was so disconnected. He had so much pain in his body. He had so much pain in his mind. He started with suicidal ideation, with suicidal thoughts when he was only 13 years old. And then again, those thoughts came when he was like 20, and then at several times where he wanted to commit suicide. But then he reports it's not that he wanted to kill himself because he was a coward or because he lost a million or because he wanted to demonstrate against a political or situational cause. It is because he felt so much pain. He felt that all the pain that he lived in childhood was a pain that he somehow was directly responsible. He somehow was guilty of. Again, he lived in benches when he moved to England. Then he lived in the street. He was a man who basically wanted to get rid of his pain. As we mentioned with addicts, that they have these high doses of heroin or codeine or high doses of crack cocaine or different synthetic drugs because people have so much pain they don't even know where it comes from. So at the end, as Eckhart Tolle reports, there was so much pain. His mind was creating so much aggression towards him. It was basically in those voices saying him, you are a piece of S. You don't belong here. You aren't worthy of living. You are not necessarily for this world, because he actually felt that from childhood. And there was a point, as he reports, that the mind was trying to deal with this pain, as he calls it, mind, all these thoughts, all these feelings. And there was a moment that he just suddenly fell silent. It was like a meditation induction without he ever learning meditation at that time, that suddenly the whole thoughts, memory, and system collapsed. And suddenly he experienced this silence, this clarity, this non-identification with our life story, with our hurt feelings, with our family traumas, with our multi-generational pain and secrets and abandonment and crisis and wars and evictions, that he just basically look at his experience without any thought, and is where he identified with awareness. He identified with being present and not with all the thoughts that were coming time and again to remind him of how miserable, how unworthy, how unnecessary he could be. Now, that's a very interesting story, because our basic nature is to search for a sense of worth and belonging. As psychologists say, we want to be seen with eyes of love. We want to be seen with appreciation. And that appreciation is not necessarily seen with the eyes, but is felt through our whole system, that we are beings worth living this life. And that's actually very consistent with the theory of evolution. When Darwin studied the birds in those islands, in those Galapagos Islands, where he saw that the same species of birds, they have a change in their beak because of adaptations to the food available in different islands. If we observe what happened there, it's not that the bird somehow held an internal meeting with its cells and said, well, we need a stronger beak, or we need a larger beak, or we need a more aggressive behavior in that island because food is scarce here, and there are other species which have to compete for food with. Basically, cells adapt through a sensor of the environment. And that sensor is what we inherit through our bodily biological structures that actually are fed through cognitive and energetic structures. And in the same way as when a bird kicks out a pigeon, kicks out a chick from its nest, naturally the cells close down and they stop producing hormones of growth, and they start dying because nature is basically telling them you are not welcome into existence. Similarly, we as animal species that we belong to as human beings, we have these three brains. We have the stem brain, which we share with most animals, particularly it's called reptilian brain, the stem brain. Then we have the limbic brain, mostly shared by mammals. And then the prefrontal cortex, that indeed other animals have it, but not as developed and not as complex as human beings, where we are able to speak about things which don't exist. As the historian Yuval Noah Harari says, human beings are the only species that speak of things that don't exist. They create myths. They create rites, rituals. They create religions, and they say, no, 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 my God is actually stronger than yours, has more arms, and has a monkey or an elephant head, or is blue, or has a long beard, and actually has complete omniscience and complete power, and so on. Of course, I'm respectful of every form of religion. But speaking of our brain, the brain has what it's called in the academy, the so-called gossip theory. And the gossip theory is that human beings imagine through their mental abstractions of things that don't exist. And that also has to do, it's an incredible part of our brain that connects to our limbic emotional system, which is again connected to our memory from childhood, or even memory from our ancestors, and that we always take reference with constantly as we create a cognitive experience of reality. We always touch parts of our subconscious memory, of our childhood, of different morphic emotional fields, and it is why we create, and sometimes we guess things. We recreate things that happen in the family that were kept secret, and we repeat it here unconsciously through choosing partners, through choosing careers, through sometimes getting the same disease as other ancestors that we say is DNA. Well, if it was DNA, why not everyone got the same disease? Sometimes it is also basic uh, manifestation of these energy fields that we belong to, and that's why uh, we are able to uh, represent, we are able to perform situations that we don't know that are not only in our subconscious, but in the family's subconscious. Now, that's very interesting because when we become human beings have a need to belong, and then when they reach autonomy, self-reliance, then they become. But now their structures, if they are lacking, then they can create symptoms, both bodily symptoms and at the same time, emotional symptoms that no matter how rich, how attractive, how intelligent, how famous people could be, how astute they could be, they could have a big disconnection that brings about human pain. Now, before I go any further, I want to go through a meditation. Um, and this meditation has its roots in Buddhism. This meditation, it is called metta, which in the old language that the Buddha used, the old language was called Pali in its literary form, and Magadhi in its vernacular form. Metta means loving kindness. Now, this meditation is actually very useful to start creating an implicit message to our 50 trillion cells, to our memories that are deeply embedded in our subconscious, that we can actually override the program of not belonging, override the program of unworthiness or guilt or whatever we may be experiencing on the unconscious level. So this loving kindness meditation we will practice, I will be explaining it, but also it is usually related also to a forgiveness meditation. Why forgiveness together with loving kindness? Forgiveness is really important because as human beings we are usually born with what Freud used to call the primary narcissism. This narcissistic tendency when we are born is really important. Basically, we feel the center of the universe. We feel we are it. We feel that mom is actually there, created to serve us, to feed us, to raise us, to be there when we cry or when we feel bad or when we are cold or whatever. And then we start decentralizing our deep sense of narcissism. Now, this narcissistic approach we are born into, it is a biological and necessary cognitive stage in order to belong, to grow, and to have a sense of self thanks to the belonging that others give you. No wonder human beings are the animals with the longest time for racing. From that understanding, from that basic idea, we come from a very centered and narcissistic sense of self until we start growing and we start decentralizing reality in order to understand that we are part of and we are not the center of the universe. Actually, history teaches that narcissistic leaders such as Stalin or Hitler or Mussolini, just to mention a few, and then a few emperors of China, the most ruthless, were actually very narcissistic. Were individuals that they didn't tolerate others' opinions, and they actually uh, exterminated others with particular cruelty, and at the same time, they purged even family members, even close friends. What is that? That's a child which feels that he's going to be abandoned by the mother, by nature, or by the surroundings because they didn't feel the security, the support which is necessary in the beginning. Now, from this centralized experience, whenever we are in love or when we are in a difficult environment, we start feeling guilty. We start disconnecting from ourselves and we start feeling anger towards ourselves, depression. We become addicts because we don't tolerate being ourselves. We feel there is something wrong with us. We become suicidal. Many kids nowadays are cutting themselves in wrists and ankles. Others, they start hitting themselves with pipes or with tools because basically they don't tolerate themselves. Different food disorders that people have are also symptoms of people not being able to feel a lot of let's say, anguish and pain that they experience in childhood. Now, as we grow up, this grows as a sense of guilt that we are not enough, that we are stupid, that there is something wrong with us. So in order to have the refreshing dew of loving kindness, we need to first decentralize that experience through self-forgiveness and forgiveness of others. So I'll be guiding the meditation. It is not very technical. It is not as the breaths that we practiced last week that we need to, remember a few things. Here, we just basically go along with the guided meditation. I'll remove my coat because it's becoming a bit warm. So we need to be in comfortable clothes, and if we can sit in a meditation posture, all the better. If not, on a chair, just with the back straight, as I said last week, our elbows should be like open, not like this, right? Just open and comfortable. And to start with this practice, we need to focus on the breath. We may close our eyes feel the flow of air, which flows inside ourselves. It invigorates our body. And as we breathe out, we feel a sense of relaxation and present moment awareness. We try not to control thoughts and feelings. We try not to analyze. We don't try to think or to bring about an emotion. We just relax in present moment awareness. And now we begin with the forgiveness meditation. And as we visualize that we are in front of a mirror, as we appear right now, as we remember ourselves from this morning, we see our hair or scalp, our eyes, our face, and we see the rest of our body standing in front of that mirror. And as we look at ourselves in that reflection, we think, I forgive myself. We repeat it in our minds. I forgive myself for having abandoning me, for keeping a distorted image of me, for thinking I am not enough, for feeling I wasn't worth it, for carrying guilt all these years, for carrying resentments. I forgive myself for not having dared to do meaningful things, for not having taken important decisions, for not speaking my mind. I forgive myself for not being fair with me, for not respecting me. I forgive myself for thinking I am the problem. We imagine looking at ourselves, and as if we are talking to another person, we slightly bow to our image in the mirror and we say, please forgive me. I respect you. I think highly of you. I honor you. Thank you for keeping me alive. Thank you for being myself. Please forgive me. And we also now practice forgiveness of others. And we address, first of all, our mother and father right in front of us. And we address them saying, please forgive me for having disrespected you, for judging you, for using harsh words towards you, for negative thoughts towards you. Please forgive me for overstepping my roles. I am only your son or daughter. I have no right to judge you. I have no right to think I could have done it better than you because you gave me life. You gave me what you could in the moment and in the way you could. Please forgive me because it is thanks to what you are and the place you have that I was born. I chose you unconsciously to be born from you too. I ask you for forgiveness and ask you to always have the place of my parents. I am only your son, daughter, that no matter what happened, I am alive. I belong to me. I have forgiven myself and the world thanks to you. Please give me your blessings. Please give me your loving care wherever you are so that my life be blessed and meaningful. And now we can include people we have interacted throughout our lives, from siblings to neighbors to friends, colleagues, co-workers. And those we've had difficulties with, we ask them for forgiveness. The reason we ask for forgiveness is that it is thanks to forgiveness that we are able to give to others the heavy and painful energy from them we are carrying in our hearts. So we ask for forgiveness. Please forgive me for not being able to understand, for judging you, for concluding just one side of you without letting shine other qualities from all of you. Forgive me for my pride, my arrogance, my resentment, my spite. Please forgive me. I let you go. I let you go about your life without me carrying any negative emotion towards you. And then we again ask for forgiveness to people we don't even know, to nature, to oceans, to rivers, to animals, for having directly or indirectly caused you pain, for causing destruction, pollution, for causing lack. I ask you for forgiveness. And now we also, excluding our parents, because we don't have the position to forgive our parents, we only are in the position to be grateful for or grateful to them. We accept every fault of others or every pain or difficulty others have caused on us. And we say, I forgive you for everything you may have caused me in the past, in the present, or the future. I forgive you and let you go completely. We breathe in deeply. We exhale. And as we are focused on this meditation, we also focus on loving kindness. And we start with ourselves again, imagining, looking our image in the mirror in front of us. And we think or say in our minds, I wish you good, I wish you love, and I wish you happiness. I wish you fulfillment. I wish that all pain subsides in you. I wish that you reach all of your goals, that you be healthy, that you be prosperous. I wish you to hold and honor many meaningful relationships. I wish that your life be meaningful. And we try to feel as we say those words towards ourselves, the energy we feel in our bodies. having forgiven us, having directed loving kindness towards us, now we focus on others. And we imagine our parents and all beings around our parents. All beings include not only humans, but also animals and every sentient being we could fathom or imagine. And we think in our minds, or we say in our minds, I wish you good. I wish you happiness. I wish you health. I wish you compassion. I wish you a meaningful life. I wish you a life of fulfillment. I wish you joy. I wish you prosperity of all kinds. I wish you meaningful relationships. I wish you a life of purpose. I wish you freedom inside and out. I wish you dignity. I wish you understanding. I wish you freedom to make choices for your life. I wish you the possibility of change. And as we make this wish of loving kindness, wish of happiness towards all living beings, we also try to feel the energy in our bodies. We breathe in deeply. We exhale. And now we imagine that our body now becomes trillions of dust motes of pixels, if we wish. And all those trillions of pixels become part of the body of every living being, which are part of their happiness and the wish of love and meaning and purpose. It is as if part of our loving heart is part of every sentient being. And now we imagine that all beings' bodies becomes a mote of dust, that all beings' bodies now make up our whole body as if we are made of all living beings, thoughts, wishes, bodies, every molecule, every cell, every atom, every electron that we are composed of is made out of all living beings. And as we breathe in, we feel connectedness, we feel love, we feel compassion towards us and all beings. And as we breathe out, we just expand this connection without any sense of separateness towards all. We breathe in, wish happiness. Sorry, let me close the door. There is some gusts of wind here. Ready. So we breathe in, feel the joy and happiness, not only of us, but of all living beings. As we breathe out, we feel connected to everything and everyone. So we begin by slowly coming out of the meditation. We open our eyes, feel relaxed. Well, I hope the practice was clear to you, meaningful to you. Um, so, as we have finished this meditation, well, the wind is strong here. um, we will continue with the next points that we have established in this webinar. If you happen to have any question, please feel free to write it in the chat in the Q&A area. I don't know if we have it. If we have it here, right? Yeah, some people are requesting a Spanish webinar. Indeed, we have that webinar. Um, we had it yesterday. Next week, our English webinar will be on next Thursday, not Wednesday, as today, and the Spanish seminar on Wednesday and not Tuesday, and that has to do with some national day here in Mexico. Well, um, there seems to be no questions. No problem. We'll go into the next idea, an introduction to Buddhist psychology. We could say that Buddhism in itself is a form of psychology because it focuses primarily on mind. Mind understood as awareness, and on the other hand, mental events. Sometimes it is called mental formations, sometimes it's called just basically the dynamic aspect of awareness, thoughts, feelings, and so on. So there are two aspects in general in Buddhist psychology, that which is called chitta. Chitta is a Sanskrit word which we translate here as awareness. And we also have the other aspect of mind, which is called chaita in Sanskrit, which are mental events. thoughts, feelings, and so on. Um, it's important to understand that when we speak of mental events, chaita, is when Buddhism speaks of impermanence, is when Buddhism speaks of suffering, is when Buddhism speaks of non-identity, sometimes called emptiness, but that's a very misleading word, especially for a Western trained audience. Non-identity, nairatmya, is actually the best uh, concept, which when Buddhism speaks of impermanence, speaks of mental events, thoughts, feelings. When Buddhism speaks of suffering, what or the reason we suffer, the Buddha said, it is not of what we think or what feelings arise, but is the attachment and the identification to those feelings and thoughts and experiences as a self. And it is because mind, let's say, not the aware aspect of mind, but the dynamic aspect of mind, it is constantly arising and subsiding, that we create a self of ever-changing identity. And that identity that we think is a self, that whenever we lose a situation, a job, a relationship, an ability, physical appearance, quality, or ability, is when we feel the, let's say, the fangs of suffering. We feel that something has changed and we are losing identity, and that brings a lot of panic. Now, meditation in Buddhism does not have to do with just like becoming transcendental and having a purple light coming from the cosmos or anything like that. It focuses on pacifying the thoughts, feelings, pain, strong cells of identity that it is so fixed in ourselves that whenever there is a change, whenever there is a challenge into our established reality, is when we feel a lot of suffering. Pema Chudron, this amazing speaker, author, Buddhist teacher, has a book called When Everything Falls Apart. And this book speaks on a very grounded, a very practical way, how she, in her own life, her own experience, had everything planned with her husband, kids, plans for grandsons and granddaughters. And all of a sudden, the discovery of her husband's extramarital affairs broke down the identity she had built for years, that it was in her memories from childhood, the expectancy, the future she had built in her mind, and everything fell apart. And when all this fixed self of identity collapsed in one moment, she reports of just being there, not doing much, looking at awareness, and somehow looking at awareness brought in her a great sense of peace. Not that the situation changed, not that it did become, not that that it became Disneyland or some miracle happened. It just basically reality was in your face and you had to deal with it. Now, Buddhism is not um, proposing that we are just like, oh, you know, my husband is there with someone else, it's not a problem, or I'll go for an ice cream while he, you know, says goodbye or anything like that. Basically has to do with not taking yourself seriously, to living your experience as non-judgmental, as not concrete, that you can have a meaningful life and meaningful and responsible and honest relationships, that you can be a functional human being, but not being fixed, because whenever you fix your reality, whenever old age comes, whenever disappointment comes from co-workers or the economy or the world or a spouse or friends, even your own body that disappoints you because it somehow after the um, annual exam you happen to have very bad results. If we relate to ourselves with the understanding that everything is impermanent, that nothing has a fixed identity, that at the same time suffering arises whenever we have a sense of concreteness, a sense of um, fixing ourselves and reality, obviously the whole world will disappoint us. So Buddhism distinguishes between one part of our experience is awareness, the other part is the dynamic nature of things, that you have to relate looking at them and not resisting them, not running away from them, not pretending are not there. Whenever you have pain, you have to say, I have pain. Whenever you are upset, you have to acknowledge, you have to own that you are upset. You have to be authentic. You don't have to pretend to be happy. In order to awaken from our illusory world, we have to look at the nature of illusion. Now, it seems there is a question there. I think this meditation is great for this moment we are living. We disconnect with ourselves. Thanks. Thank you. I appreciate it. Um, Indeed, sometimes we are very judgmental with ourselves. Sometimes we don't forgive ourselves. And forgiveness, it's a beautiful word. Um, in Spanish, we only use the word perdón, which actually it's quite uncomfortable because when you say to pardon, right? It sounds like a presidential pardon. And who actually gives a pardon? Someone who is a president. But you don't pardon your parents because you are the child, right? You are not morally or existentially above them, because with whatever inner resources they had, they brought you into this life. And the reason you are born from them is because there is a connection. But if you overstep into judging them like a judge and then pardoning them, then you're actually doing yourself a disservice. You are actually overstepping your position as someone who has to get the blessing of existence and the blessing of love, that even though you might not have received it uh, historically, experientially, you could actually uh, bring it about through your own therapeutic and healing process. And that's really important. Fine. So Buddhist psychology, coming back to the reflection, Buddhist psychology gives us the opportunity to go beyond the illusion of a self. Not that a self is a bad thing, but when we fix a self, we will be in trouble because we don't know whether the self when we were teenagers is better than when we were children, or 5 years ago, or 10 years ago, 15 years ago. And we might think we have the best version of ourselves when we uh, won't be able to walk or to breathe or to look attractive or intelligent or self-reliant. Then we have this self crisis, and that is through fixing, sometimes called attachment. That is through fixing a sense of identity in a body which is changing, obviously, emotions which are changing, thoughts which are changing. So when we look at mental events, when we look at the dynamic nature of our life, we have to go with the flow. If we try to walk against the flow, we will obviously receive suffering. We will be constantly disappointed, as if trying to make the past come back. That's impossible. So meditation, if we could bring it into two steps, one part of the meditation is to pacify mental events, and that includes karma. That includes the cause and effect that our thoughts, feelings, cravings, resentments on a subconscious or conscious level bring about decisions which eventually become results. And sometimes we don't like to see the results. So one part of Buddhist meditation is to pacify that dynamic nature, those estranged voices, those painful situations that aren't cohesive into our personality. And pacification, sometimes in Tibetan Buddhism, is also called karma purification. And sometimes it's called working with disturbing emotions. And sometimes it's called shamatha, just pacifying mind's activity. But that's an important part of our training as human beings. We don't need to be religious. We don't need to be Buddhists. What we need to do is to stop this self-aggression. Self-aggression, it's a way of judging ourselves. Aggression to others is just trying to change others. Is trying to make the world a better place in a very dictatorial way, in a very narcissistic way. So when you stop judging, when you start looking at your mind, when you start seeing that the way you judge others is a direct way of judging you, it's a way of hiding your own pain. Whenever you criticize, whenever you are angry at politicians or world leaders or religions or religious people or others in general, it's a way of discharging your pain without owning your responsibility with the pain you have. So whenever you stop judging yourself and judging others and start resting in shamatha meditation, obviously there are many techniques. We could learn a couple of them. But one of the basic meditations um, is that one which you focus on the breath. Remember last week that we were focusing on the breath and holding the breath at certain stages in order to bring about your concentration. What happened when you did that? What happened is that you stopped your inner mental chatter. You stop all these constant voices, this constant um, personality aspirations or personality or self projections, and you start just basically entering the part of awareness, which is the second stage. The second stage of meditation is not only to reduce, pacify this constant activity, this constant emotional and mental flow, but just to rest in what is called unborn, non-referential awareness. Is what happened to Eckhart Tolle when, I told that briefly his life story. Whenever you stop being controlled by thoughts, feelings, memories, and unconscious um, unconscious actions or thoughts or obsessions, then you rest in that awareness and you realize you are enough right now, that you are sufficient, that this moment is perfect, that you needn't really worry to save yourself from yourself, that you don't need to achieve those many needs outside in order to be sufficient, that you just basically can be enough if you are kind enough, loving enough, um, peaceful enough towards yourself, and then naturally it will flow onto others. So, having said that, the first stage of meditation, pacifying, which includes purifying karma and emotions. And the second stage is to deepen your awareness, which in Buddhism is called awakening. In fact, even in Sanskrit, whenever you say someone awoke, you say budki. Bud comes from the Buddha, which is just a honorific title to say the awakened one. Doesn't mean that suddenly he had all Google in his mind. What basically means to be awakened is that you have awakened from the dreamlike illusion of being your thoughts, of being your feelings, of being the ever-changing bodily and mental self, that whenever you see your body and your mental events as a changing reality, you understand that awareness is beyond life and death. As the Mahamudra texts say, awareness, awakening is beyond coming and going, is beyond being born and dying, is beyond uniting and separating. That's just a mental event which is happening. An awakening, it's actually the experience of non-identifying and keeping awareness by itself. That's why sometimes it is called naked awareness, non-referential awareness. Sometimes it's called the unborn nature. There is another question here. It says, Marisa, meditation, or as far as Buddhist meditation is trying to calm our inner demons. When you practice meditation, you become more sensitive. Can you feel energy that you didn't know it existed? Indeed, um, you can certainly become more sensitive. You can become, first of all, more sensitive towards yourself. You can, for example, some people stop meditating altogether, even though they might go to yoga or um, some meditation classes. They stop meditating whenever they start deepening in their experience of awareness. And that is because sometimes there are layers of trauma, layers of pain that they will say, oh, that's not for me. I get distracted and so on. So sometimes when you start meditating, you could feel some uneasiness. Sometimes you can feel inner pain, memory pain, family pain. Sometimes you just might feel that you are not comfortable and that you need to, for example, get distracted, or instead of meditation, go to spinning where music is like really stimulating and you're moving and sweating and somebody shouting, you are the best in the world and so on, because mind is addicted towards its images. Mind is addicted to hyper stimuli. Mind is addicted to being placed outside itself. Now, focusing on your specific question, indeed you can become sensitive. Indeed, you could heal yourself. Indeed, you could also become more intelligent, happier, according to Richard Davidson, this neuropsychologist from the University of Madison, Wisconsin. He said that you create new synaptic connections in your brain just with 7 minutes of meditation. Those new synaptic networks or connections, they just happen because you are training in awareness. Um, so indeed, that's important. That reminds me of that which Dr. Davidson said. Have you ever felt that when you come out of a movie, or a certain movie, not all movies, right? That you kind of feel the personality of the main actress or actor? That you sometimes speak like in the movies, or you are like, you know, stimulated and you feel like, somehow it reached you. What happened here is in your brain, you created a change in the synaptic processes. It is as if you start playing basketball after a long time, or chess after a long time. You start creating new neural pathways. And that does not only have to do with physical skills, mental skills, but has also to do with emotional skills. Now, as we meditate, we again are creating new pathways of mental calm. You could replace gradually a state of anxiety into a state of presence, into a state of calmness. So indeed, one could become more sensitive, one could become happier, one could become more fulfilled, or one could have a sense of contentment. What is that sense of contentment? Of the sense of being enough. That you don't need to become as your neighbor or as a famous person, that you don't need to be more than what you are now. It dawns on you a sense of acceptance, which is also really important. So great. Yeah, good, uh, good meditations. And I hope that this is something that we could be working on. I hope that this experience of a webinar in English could yeah, well, could give some new inputs, new ideas to some people. In the webinar yesterday in Spanish, we are having 700 to 800 people. Um, in English, it's certainly much less. However, it's a really good opportunity. We have the chance of, being able to reflect on those things. And I hope it's not your typical Buddhist lecture, which I gave for decades, and uh, uh, more as in a very structured, more as in a very traditional way, which is also worth doing it. But, uh, we try to get into broader reflections that can give a hand to, people not necessarily interested in Buddhism directly. Now, the next slide speaks of cognitive and emotional isolation. And that's an adaptive response. Whenever you see in you or in others that feeling, um, is not because you are a strange person, that you are an odd person. Basically, isolation, it's an adaptive response. It's a coping mechanism that your body and your emotions and cognition enter into a capsule, into an isolating or isolation mood in order to protect himself or in order to protect itself as a body or as an organism. Now, um, our society gradually is falling into this isolation. And I'm not talking about the COVID confinement or the COVID divorce that many people are experiencing. Is that probably this crisis, this pandemic, is bringing about serious emotional, cognitive, and mental problems to people who already had this tendency, but now they don't have much chance of going out and drink with friends or go to massive concerts or sports events or, be counting points and statistics and fantasy statistics in games, and you're not watching the news as some strange people happen to die on a car accident, but you are actually feeling the fear within your four walls. And that pandemic, which is not only the virus, but it's also a mental health pandemic, it is actually making that our trauma on an individual and collective basis, it is re-emerging. And it's bringing a lot. I mean, many people have contacted me with panic attacks, with divorce crisis, with self-aggression, with violence, at home, with great in-law and family troubles when, family all of a sudden are invited in, but the spouse didn't agree or was not asked for that. So we are finding a lot of drinking problems or substance abuse problems, even from anxiety pills. Um, it is showing how poorly equipped we are as human beings to have ownership of ourselves, how poorly equipped we are to connect to ourselves. Because if we are connected on a genuine, authentic level to others, then you could understand to be good to you and to be relaxed and to find creative activities. But what turns out is that since your connection to others is more on an economic, professional, competitive, economic level, then whenever you're disconnected, you are left to yourself. So that brings about the distinction that Trungpa Rinpoche, a great Buddhist teacher, used to say. That's the difference between isolation, what we are talking about here, and solitude. Solitude is an experience that probably a mystic experience solitude, but everything is with her or with him. Solitude as a retreat, a book retreat, or a time for reflection, or a time for mastering a discipline, of meditation, of creating a project, of enjoying the new possibility that this experience brings with your family, that you are relating in a different way and you are happy. Obviously, you aren't happy of others suffering, but there is not much you can do except, being at home, as we understand. So that's an interesting thing, to be able to work from inside out and not the contrary, as we have been told. Now, over the years, studying Buddhism, and particularly the so-called Yogacara or Semtsampa school of Buddhism, which is a philosophical Buddhist school, sometimes called idealist. Idealist in the philosophical sense. Idealism has to do with images. The reality is made out of images, not to be moved by the ideals. Anyway, so that Buddhist school, which is called the mind-only school as well, tells us that there are a lot of mental imprints in our unconscious. In the so-called eighth consciousness, the Alaya Vishnana, there are a lot of karmic seeds. Karmic from karma, seeds, right? And those seeds, when they sprout, when they arise, they create the projection of our reality. Now, those karmic seeds are together with habits. Habits that I spoke earlier on, which is called like habitual tendencies. Those habits become a projection of reality, and that which we project into reality not necessarily is what it exists, but sometimes is our tendencies and fixations that, according to the Yogacara school, we take as external, but actually are our mental habits. Now, when we read about shadow and projection, it is reminiscent. It reminds us of Carl Jung. Carl Jung, which spoke about the shadow and the persona in his own terms. That is the shadow and its projection. That from our unconscious, we have all kinds of trauma, and the metaphoric sense of the shadow is that we obscure things, we cover things we cannot work with in that moment, particularly when we are young. So we cover that. For example, a sense of unworthiness. I'm not good enough because my parents told me I was unworthy, dirty, shameful, or whatever, right? Or probably we were so many siblings, they didn't have time for me, or they were so traumatized themselves our parents, that obviously they didn't have time for us and we felt probably unworth it. Or they were stressed out by different financial, war, conflict reasons, whatever it is, that we cover that unfulfillment. And as we grow up and we don't work with the shadow, then we project. But what is interesting is that we project the opposite. So if we don't feel worthy of love or worthy of attention on or in our projection, then we will obsessively try to be indispensable. For example, being a workaholic that never miss a day of work, or being the most sacrifice prone wife that, you know, whatever is asked of her, she will do it, and she will stand no matter what happened, even at the cost of being betrayed or being neglected, but nonetheless, she is meant to be the best mother on earth, as an example. Or, for example, if we don't feel enough, or we don't feel that we are valued, then we try to make an effort in our projection, or as Jung said, persona. We try to be more than the others. Probably we will be, you know, in showbiz, or probably we will be in PhD faculties or university, just trying to say, oh, I know so much, or I'm so famous and I'm so beautiful and I have acted in so many movies. But as we can probably see, the lives of most of uh, the famous and rich are actually miserable. And that's actually a perfect example of shadow and projection, because the shadow is what is covered, the miserable, unfulfilled lives, and the projection is they are like, wow, you know, they are larger than life. Sorry, I can stop drinking. In this case, it's tea, but I need to refresh my mouth a bit. Um, Having said that, if we evaluate, if we look inside many of our projections, of our persona, or what we want to show to the world, is in the exact contrast of our shadow. I'm not saying that the shadow is bad. In fact, shadow is a cover-up necessary for us to survive, because we at some point were not able to handle it, particularly when we were young. But as we relate, as we are able to explore through meditation, through studying Buddhist psychology, through reflections, webinars, or information of this nature, then gradually we will come to understand. We will come to make this strong cover-up, which is called the strong shadow, that which is giving us trouble and we are running away from ourselves. As we contact with loving kindness, with forgiveness, our own pain and our own limitations, then we will be able to make that strong shadow a weak shadow. And a weak shadow doesn't mean that it stops being a shadow, because it is a an unconscious experience, interpretation. It is part of our biography, emotional biography, so to speak. But once you touch it with understanding, with meditation, with forgiveness, with openness, with authenticity, then you can start to weaken that um, demand of light that the shadow has, and the demand of light will become the projection, which is demanding light. Look at me, how worthy I am, how powerful I am, how attractive I am, how exemplary I am. And you look at those people which are so pretentious, which look, I'm perfect, my life is perfect, my children are perfect, my studies, my knowledge, my, you can see how much lack eventually can turn out to be when you basically are just focused outside. That's why the world, in its greed, in its avarice, in its ambition, keeps most of the world in poverty, while a handful of families are keeping half of the world's GDP, right? So, as Gandhi used to say, the world has enough resources for everyone's need, but the world doesn't have enough resources for everyone's greed. That is to say, we are clearly so externalized, so focused on fulfillment outside to have the perfect uh, profile, the perfect appearance to others, while we have forgotten to belong to ourselves, to be authentic, to touch upon our pain, to be kind to oneself and to others, to stop judging others by the money, by the grades at school, by stop judging or grading people by their appearance, because then if we happen to do that, the unbalance with wealth, uh, climate, ecosystems, mental health becomes in such a state that you can see most of our world politicians are actually very unhappy, traumatized children, very upset, their emotions, they can't sleep, they're always fighting, and you know, they are always making silly decisions, most of them, right? I don't get into politics, but as we see that the world leaders are actually emotional children, traumatized children, uh, beings which are on the projection or persona part, that they are basically um, exteriorized in such a way that they put in danger themselves and they put in danger others. So that's just to finish and to, I want to, we start a little late, a few minutes late. I just want to finish with this slide, and at the same time, just also finish with a breathing exercise. We already made our meditation. A breathing exercise is very useful, but I want to just say a few words about the pain in me and pain in others. This is just to point out at the fact that we are interrelated. As Daniel J. Siegel, Dr. Dan Siegel says, as we meditate, if we create a we space instead of a me space, only my needs, only my traumas, only my people, Once through mindful awareness, sometimes it's called kindfulness instead of mindfulness. If we can create in ourselves 5 minutes a day, as he plays with words, a space of awareness. You could use the exercise we made a while ago, or you just basically feel one with the elements: air, water, fire, earth, space you could include. And in the Tibetan tradition, there are many exercises with breathing and then repeating, or, doing different uh, hands and breathing techniques, all focused on harmonizing the elements within and without. Now, when we speak of pain in me and in others, as we are all interrelated, as we are all interconnected, Mahayana Buddhism tells us, whenever you create, whenever you develop the wish that others stop suffering, whenever you become aware of other people, then somehow, clinically, it is proven, you reduce your sense of anxiety. You start seeing your own problems as smaller compared to those of others. Not that it's satisfactory to see others' pain, but whenever you start feeling genuine, authentic compassion, awareness of the other, knowledge of the others, then you actually start forgiving yourself. So, as a phrase, as a conclusion, we could say that if you only focus on relieving yourself of pain, pain will be endless. But as you focus yourself on bringing happiness, meaning, fulfillment in others, somehow your life automatically becomes meaningful, because you don't have to protect, and you don't have to solidify all the painful aspects of yourself. So through loving motivation, compassionate motivation, you will start to um, integrate in yourself parts that you feel pain, parts that you could probably have trauma, through alleviating others of issues of, I'm not saying that you don't have to train. I'm just saying that you need to have a more compassionate, open, non-personal attitude towards reality. Life is not meant that we are just trying to become self-perfected beings, but actually that we become compassionate, open, joyful, aware of others, and life certainly will become much more peaceful, much more meaningful and fulfilling. Well, so I will leave. I hope you can copy it or take a screenshot and later on look at it. These are 3 books that I recommend if you happen to be interested in deepening your understanding in like neuroscience or science and Buddhism and meditation and so on. The first 2 books have to do with neuropsychology, neuroscience. Uh, Descartes' Error, Emotion, Reason, and the Human Brain. will give us a lot of insights into what I have spoken, like, let's say randomly, or, well, not randomly, but I have spoken like, with a few references regarding the uh, child's brain connections and the importance of the connection towards a mature adult presence and so on. Dan J. Siegel, The Power of Showing Up, How Parental Presence Shapes Who Our Kids Become and How Their Brains Get Wired. Fascinating book, fascinating. Then if you want to deepen into Buddhism from a scientific point of view, uh, amazing. That was a PhD dissertation that Jeremy Hayward made. It's, well, honestly, it's the only book I recommend from him. The other ones are, well, to me at least, not very interesting. Shifting Worlds, Changing Minds is a very rigorous research on history, science, Buddhism. Highly recommended. Well, just to finish, now we will do a very brief exercise. Probably we can add more complexity next time with it for these type of exercises. What I want you to do is, again, place the tip of your thumb in the base of your ring finger, right? We close our fists and we start breathing as we mentioned last week. I think that when we breathe in, we expand our belly. We breathe out, we pull it in. We breathe in, we breathe out, in, out, right? So as we constantly, we breathe in and out. Once you hear my hands clapping, you don't have to clap yourself. Once you hear my hands clapping, then you breathe and you have to pull yourself like forward. Symbolically, the Tibetan tradition says that you take the prana, the energy from a non-narcissistic, let's say, radius once you go forward. Otherwise, the radius of energy of air we take here, usually it is polluted with our own narrative, with our emotions, with our feelings, and so on. Anyway, it's just symbolical. I just want you to know why one would breathe in doing that. From the nose, we don't breathe in from the mouth, and we don't breathe out from the mouth. We only use the nostrils. So we do this. And once we hold our breath, we try to create pressure in our abdomen. We try to create pressure here in the belly. We close our inner or lower openings. And then we make 7 times. We use our fist. Could be left or right, doesn't matter. The point is that the other one has to be putting pressure up. So we will do opening our hand above our head, and we make 1, 2, 3, 4, all with our, with our breath in. We don't need to exhale. In a mindful and conscious way, 7 times with our right hand, if we want to start with the right hand. Then without breathing out, without exhaling, we change our hand, and then we again start. 1, 2, look how above, as I move my hand, goes above my head, it's open, and then I close my hand once it's stretched. 5, 6, obviously we don't need to count, right? Everything is with the air in. Once we finish our 7th left hand movement, we put our fist back in its place, and then we breathe out through our nostrils, like slowly, and then rapidly, and then like strongly we breathe out. So we start doing that. I repeat very quick. We start breathing in and out with the belly, sorry. Once we hear the clap, you don't need to clap. Then take the air in, and we start with the air in, doing 7 with one arm, with the same breath, another 7. Try to make your movements very clear, very well defined. Some people start like doing like this. I mean, it's not a rodeo here. So, you know, Mark, not very like violent that you could, you know, probably have some pain. We don't need pain, you know, we just need to do it properly. And once we finish the 7th movement from the other arm, we breathe out from our nostrils, slowly first and then strongly. Once we finish, we relax our body, our hands, and we remain in a state of chitta awareness, right? So we start. Tip of our thumbs in the base of our ring finger. Well, it seems there is some other question here just to finish very quickly. Thank you. Very interesting. Right. Thanks a lot to all. Um, thanks for taking the time of being in this seminar. And well, I hope there is some level of reflection or input that might be useful. Thanks a lot for being